your endorsement. So I'm also praying that Willie Nelson does not get into the Democratic primary for president, because then I'll really have a shot at this. Thank you. And thanks for reminding us of those who serve and sacrifice for this country. Not lost on us that we are so near Shaw Air Force Base. Reminded of this by the veterans that I had a chance to meet with and listen to before we started this meeting. And it reminded me very much of the first campaign that I ran for the United States Congress. We were taking on an incumbent, and we were taking on the odds. This guy had served for 8 terms already in the U.S. House. He outspent us in that campaign 5-1, and we made a virtue of a necessity of knocking on doors. That was the only way I was going to be able to meet the voters who were going to decide that election. We didn't have the money to be on TV or to send out the mailings. I literally had to knock on doors and make sure that it would work. And I knew as we were approaching election day, after 9 months on the streets trying to knock 100 doors a day, that we might have a chance, because I walked into a restaurant just like this one, and someone stopped me and they said, "You're Beto, right?" I said, "I am." And he said, "Well, last week you knocked on my grandmother's door, and she invited you in. And she told you about her daughter, who's a school teacher, and some of the struggles that she has in the classroom. She told you about her grandson, who's in the Marines, and how proud she is of him. And you listened and you took it in, and then you went out and met her neighbors. Well, the Sunday after your visit, she had me and 32 of my other cousins over to her house from Menudo on a Sunday morning. And she made each one of us promise to vote for you. So he said, "Dude, I don't know who you are, but don't mess this up, because you've got our entire family's support." One of the first days that we were knocking on doors, a veteran answered. And I introduced myself, Beto O'Rourke, running to serve you in the United States House of Representatives. Tell me what's most important to you. And he said, "Well, if you really want to help me, you're going to be able to do this." He said, "I just got off the phone with the VA. This is January of 2012, trying to make a mental health care appointment for the post-traumatic stress disorder that I've been carrying ever since I returned from Vietnam. And they told me to call back next year, that all of the mental health care appointments for 2012, this is January, by the way, have already been taken." And so as I walked away from his door, I thought, well, this is somebody who's trying to make a point. He's exaggerating the facts. He's really wanting to make sure that his story makes an impact on me. But this cannot be true. January, and they want him to call back in 2013. Sure enough, more doors I knocked on, more veterans I met, more surviving widows and widowers of veterans who had lost their lives. I listened to their kids and their parents sometimes, and I found out this was not an anomaly. This was not a tall tale. This was, in fact, reality for those who had put their lives on the line for this country, willing to sacrifice those same lives in service to the United States of America, the wealthiest, the most powerful country on the face of the planet, that not only sent those men and women to Vietnam, to the first Gulf War, to Afghanistan, to Iraq, to Syria, to Yemen, Somalia, Libya, and many wars in between, racking up trillions of dollars in debt in order to do so. That same country was unwilling to bear the burden or pay the full price to take care of those who had borne the battle when they came back home. In fact, El Paso, Texas, I later learned, dead last in the United States in wait times to see a mental health care provider for veterans. Out of 148 mental health care centers in the country, we were 148th. We made this the priority of the campaign. Without a poll, not knowing how popular the idea was, this was a signature issue, the case that I was making to serve my constituents in the United States Congress. And when we won that long shot race, and I was asked what committee I wanted to serve on, it was the House Veterans Affairs Committee. Usually the basement to which you are relegated if you make the party leadership angry. Why? Because the Veterans Affairs Committee is the last place that you can raise money to assure yourself a re-election. It's the last place to court influence and corporations and special interests. It's the only place, though, that you can serve perhaps the most important interest in this country, those who are willing to serve the United States of America in uniform. So that's where I asked to be. and working with my colleagues, Republicans who are in the majority, as well as Democrats, and then pulling people in our community of El Paso, Texas, we met the challenge before us. We went from 68 full-time mental health care staff at the VA to, when I left office, just under 120. I hired myself on at no pay as the chief recruiter. If you were a psychologist or a psychiatrist practicing in some other part of the country, look out. You were going to get a phone call from me trying to get you to come down to El Paso to serve those who would appreciate it, to make more of a difference in my hometown than you could in any other part of America. We also, importantly, brought in private providers, psychiatrists and psychologists in our community, the public hospital, everyone around the table to serve those veterans. And we turned it around. And then we took what we learned and introduced it as legislation to expand mental health care access for veterans nationally. I didn't know this until someone stood up in a town hall meeting just like this one. They told me that those who return to this country with an other than honorable discharge, despite their service, despite their sacrifice, despite the fact that the United States military too often pushes women and men into an OTH designation when they no longer serve the purposes of our military, when they come back to this country, they are denied by law service in the VA, cannot set foot in that center to get the help that they need to survive. And I use that word on purpose because we know that 20 veterans a day, every single day in this country, that's a conservative estimate, take their lives. 16 of those 20 were unable to get into the VA or unwilling because they knew of the wait times and the bureaucracy and the red tape that they would have to fight. But the rate amongst those veterans who had an other than honorable discharge was twice as high. So we wrote a bill, the Honor Our Commitment Act, that would extend mental health care services to this group of veterans. But in the minority, that bill, no matter how well written, was going nowhere unless we could find a Republican colleague with whom we could work. And we did, feeling the pressure from folks just like you, who would not accept my answer if I were to come back at a town hall and say, you know what, these Republicans do not care about veterans as much as we Democrats care about veterans. Let me get into the majority, let me win my next election, and then we'll actually do something for those who are depending on us. They'd laugh me out of the room if I gave an answer like that. So that pressure from those to whom I'm accountable forced us to find Republican colleagues to introduce that bill, to compromise, as much of a four-letter word as that is in Washington, D.C. right now, to get to a consensus solution and get it onto the desk of the one person in this country with whom I agree on almost nothing, Donald J. Trump, in order to sign it into law, finding common ground and common cause, even with our political opponents, to make sure that we serve those who need us to act in the face of this injustice. Passed the House 435-0, passed the Senate as well. That's this country putting one another above our next election, above the polls, above our politics, and above our party. And I'm confident that given the challenges that we face right now, the most historic challenges in the lifetimes of anyone in this room, that's exactly what we need going forward. We're going to confront climate change that has produced these floods in the low country. I'm told every time it rains, it floods. That produced 58 inches of rain in Houston, Texas, in my home state. That's the landfall record from a single storm for as long as we've been keeping records in all of North America. The fires in California, preceded by the greatest droughts that state had ever seen. All of this that's going on right now caused not by God, not by Mother Nature, but by all of us. Our indifference or inaction in face of the facts and the science, and you know this as well as I do or you wouldn't be here. If we do not take action now, bold, confident, courageous, all of us pitching in, then what I just described will pale in comparison to what is visited upon our kids and our grandkids. We cannot meet a challenge like that one by half steps or half measures or by only half the country. This cannot be something that the Democratic Party takes on or the Republican Party takes on or big cities or coastal states like yours. It's going to take all of us doing all we can to get us to net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, to be halfway there by 2030, to ensure that we make more resilient the communities that are on the front lines of climate change so that they can still support human life going into the next generations, to put farmers in the driver's seat, to pay them for the environmental services they provide, planting cover crops that pull more carbon out of the air, using technologies like no-till or precision-till farming, regenerative agriculture to make sure that in addition to growing our food and feeding this country and the world, they help to make sure that we confront climate change before it is too late. Making sure that every single American can receive health care in a country where millions have no health care at all, and some people succumb to diabetes and the flu and curable cancer in the year 2019, in the most medically advanced, technologically superior country that humankind has ever known. Universal, guaranteed, high-quality health care, meaning primary health care, the ability to afford your prescriptions, mental health care, and every woman making her own decisions about her own body and having access to the care that makes that possible. That's going to take all of us to make sure that we do that. Having an economy that works for everyone at a time of historic wealth and income inequality, where folks, including school teachers, I'm told, in South Carolina, working 2 and 3 jobs just to make ends meet, when I want them focused on the most important job. That child in front of them, that lifelong love of learning, once cultivated and unleashed, there's no stopping that kid. There's no stopping us as a country. I'm hearing about a teacher shortage in South Carolina. 50% of teachers leave the profession within the first 5 years. They can't afford to pay the note on their student loan debt, to put food on the table, to do everything that they have to do for their families and their kids and be able to teach ours. So making sure that this economy works for everyone, that everybody is paid a living wage, that all of us can take time off to take care of ourselves and our family, our folks if we have to, that healthcare is not a function of luck, but is a human right that we can depend on. That's going to take every single one of us working together. And that's precisely the kind of campaign that we're running right now. It's the same kind of campaign we ran for Congress, the same service that I provided once I was in that position of public trust, holding town hall meetings every single month like this one. And as the senator said, it's the same way that we visited every single one of the 254 counties of Texas, going not to the reddest counties in our state, but the reddest counties on planet Earth. Glowing red, you can see them from outer space as you were orbiting planet Earth. One of them voted for Donald Trump 96% in the last election. But we showed up there because I hope you agree they're every bit as deserving of our respect, of our attention, of being heard, of being fought for, of being represented, of being served. And I had no hope of being able to deliver for them if I had not first shown up for them. And certainly not if I had written them off in the first place. By that same token, going to the big blue places and not taking them for granted, including everyone's story in what we were doing. At the end of the day, though we did not prevail in that election, we won something larger in Texas, a state that had been 50th in voter turnout before 2018. Not by accident, but by design. People drawn out of their democracy based on the color of their skin or their country of national origin. That state woke up, stood up, turned out, and was counted. We won more votes than any Democrat in the history of the state of Texas. We won independence for the first time in decades. And 500,000 Republicans, despite or because of the progressive agenda on which we ran, voted for a Republican for governor and voted for me on the same ballot. And importantly, that was led by a vanguard of young people. In early voting, they turned out at 500% greater rates than they had in the last midterm election. And the outcome? We elected 2 Democrats who replaced long-serving Republicans in seats that were thought to be too red to even compete for, helping to flip the House of Representatives, change the composition of our state legislature, helped to elect 17 African-American women in Houston, Texas, to judicial positions of trust, literally changing the face of criminal justice in the most diverse city in the United States of America. And importantly, Given the mission before us right now, we help to unlock 38 electoral college votes. I'm confident that campaigning this way, being able to do it in red states like yours and mine that are really non-voting states, we need to bring everybody in to ensure that we're reflecting the true genius and potential of our people. That's the best way to defeat Donald Trump in 2020, and the best way to bring this country together again in 2021. And that is how, and that is why I'm running to serve you as the next president of the United States of America. Thank you all for having us up. That's all we're Cynthia Connell in the University of Texas at Austin Orange, Burnt Orange, is going to take your questions. If you raise a hand, she'll bring the microphone to you. Mayor, thank you for being here. Very grateful. Appreciate it. And appreciate your service to this country as well. Thank you. Very grateful.
I got one question. This question concerns retirees, for the military. Your SBP, after you retire, you paying the SBP for your survival benefit plan, and then your spouse died before you do. Where do that money go to?
I want to make sure that when you paid in through your service to this country, that you're able to enjoy that benefit, or your heirs or successors or spouse, current spouse or perhaps future spouse, is able to enjoy the benefit that you paid for by putting your life on the line. So let's look at the survivor benefit in the same way that we looked at the post 9/11 GI Bill benefit when I served on that committee. There was an expiration date on the ability to be able to go to college and improve yourself after you've returned from service. We turned that into the forever post 9/11 GI Bill benefit, meaning that you can use it whenever you so choose, or you can pass that on to your heir, your daughter, or your son, so that they can use that earned benefit as well. Let me find a way to ensure that we fully understand how we apply that to the survivor benefit as well. And I'm going to ask that somebody from our team get your contact information so that I can follow up with you directly. But in the spirit of your question, I want to make sure that that benefit does not expire, and that if you personally or your current spouse cannot use it, then some family member is able to enjoy what you earned through your service to this country. Thank you for asking.
Back by the front door, over here.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for coming to our small town here in South Carolina. My name's Carol Allen. I'm a gynecologist here, and I'm really concerned about voter suppression and the rollback of voter rights across the nation, as well as many other things, women's rights, what we call a war on women, etc. Two questions. One, if you are chosen as a candidate, how will you encourage us to really be active and get out the people, not just in Texas, what you just said was very successful, but across the nation, especially in a place like South Carolina, where people are not incentivized to vote, because I've heard with my own ears people say it doesn't matter, such a red state. And number two, what's really important also is taking back the Senate. So if you are the candidate for president, how will you encourage good candidates to run for Senate?
Thank you for the question. Yesterday, can we turn the volume down just a little bit? Thank you. Yesterday we were in Beaufort, South Carolina, and really amazing day. I'd never been there before. Got to meet Queen Quet of the Gullah Geechee Nation. Got to be at the historic Tabernacle Baptist Church, and got to pay respects at the gravesite of Robert Smalls. Being from Texas maybe is my excuse. Maybe as a white man, did not know his history and his story, his contribution to this country. That he commandeered a Confederate ship, delivered his fellow Americans to freedom, and then continued his service in the State House and then in the United States Congress. And interestingly enough, that service extended beyond the end of Reconstruction. One of the few black legislators to serve beyond that period. But it prompts the question, why was he the last African American man to serve that district for decades. What happened in this country after Reconstruction, and how does that have a bearing on what we're seeing here today? You mentioned voter suppression. We know that effectively African Americans were, through Jim Crow and segregation and suppression, completely removed from the franchise and the ability to elect their representatives or serve as the people's representatives. Some would like to think that is a story from the past, but I'm here to say and agree with you that it is alive and well in this country today. If you did not have the Secretary of State in Georgia purge the voter rolls of hundreds of thousands of people in that state, and then serve both as the referee and the candidate in the election, then Stacey Abrams would be the governor of the state of Georgia right now. I mentioned the racist gerrymandering in Texas that has drawn people out of congressional districts, that made us 50th in voter turnout. You also have a form of voter ID law where you can use your license to carry a firearm to prove who you are at the ballot box, but you cannot use your student ID at the University of Texas at El Paso to prove who you are at the ballot box. So what is the answer to this? We announced in Georgia last week a bold set of democracy reforms that begin with bringing more people in. So over the next 4 years, we hope to register more than 55 million additional Americans through same-day and automatic voter registration, which means in part that every 16 and 17-year-old will be pre-registered so that when they turn 18, they are ready to vote and ready to have their voice heard in our democracy. We signed into law a new Voting Rights Act to end these voter roll purges, these voter ID laws, this racial and ethnic gerrymandering that we see in this country, so that there are no barriers to the ballot box. And then we restore confidence in our elections, ensuring that you either cast a paper ballot or there's a paper receipt for the electronic ballot that you cast, that we audit the elections that we hold, that we end totally the practice of gerrymandering, which I know the senator has been a strong advocate for ending. It's the process by which members of Congress choose their own voters instead of the other way around. And then we get political action committees out of the halls of Congress. No more PAC contributions to federal elections. It's members of Congress listening to voters, not corporations or special interests or anything or anybody else. If we do all of that, then we're going to bring the power of people to bear on every single one of these challenges. And you mentioned some of them specifically: restricting a woman's right to make her own decisions about her own body, which is not unconnected to the fact that we have a maternal mortality crisis in this country that is 3 times as bad for women of color in this country. If we're going to do that, it's going to have to be our democracy. It's going to have to be everyone coming forward, no matter who the next president is, no matter how resourceful or experienced she or he may be. We're going to need a movement of people expressed through state legislatures, U.S. Senate races, U.S. House races. So making sure that that's reflected not just in the highest office of the land, but every office in this land is fundamental to seeing the success that we expect on that and every single issue going forward. Thank you for asking the question. Really appreciate it.
You talked a lot about veterans earlier, which is why I want to ask about those that are currently serving. This year is the first year that we will have brand new, young, 18-year-old soldiers, brave men and women, fighting and potentially dying in wars that started before they were even born. What do you see as the role of our military if you are our presidential candidate?
I also had the honor of serving on the House Armed Services Committee when I was in Congress. And I remember when General Mattis was nominated to be Secretary of Defense, he sat down with some of the members of the committee. And he said something really powerful to us. He said, we enjoy 2 principal powers as a country. The first is the power of intimidation. Having the most powerful, the most awesome military the world has ever known. You roll up our nearest competitors' combined military budgets, and they don't even come close to what we spend or to the kind of service and sacrifice that we see from the women and men who are in uniform today. But he said the other power that we enjoy is the power of inspiration. And he said of the 2, the second is the far more powerful one. And then he said this: if you're unwilling to invest in inspiration, to see if we cannot peacefully resolve our differences or otherwise intractable problems. If you will not make sure that we put diplomats in the lead, then you had better pay for another division under my command, because we will continue to carry out foreign policy on the backs of 18 and 19 and 20-year-olds. And to your point, many of them next year will be serving in wars that were begun before they were ever born. So for the 18 years that we've been in Afghanistan, for the 28 years that we've been in Iraq, after George H.W. Bush first announced our military involvement, we've been there through every successive presidential administration since. And then to the metastasization, which is a tough word to say, of those wars into Syria and Somalia and Yemen and Libya and other places in between. We need to bring those wars to a close. We need to bring those service members back home to their communities and to their country. We need to use our indispensable authority to bring other countries together to solve these challenges peacefully. And it's a tall order, made even more difficult by the current administration, which threatens to go to war in Iran right now, threatens to go to war in Venezuela, has threatened to go to war in North Korea as well. I think we need less, not more wars. We need to end the wars that we're in, and we need to pursue diplomacy and foreign policy through nonviolent diplomatic means. That's the priority I have for our administration. Thank you.
First off, from one father to another, thank you for being here this Father's Day weekend. I know it's really hard to be away. Thank you. You laid out a lot of policy goals that you have that are very ambitious and very important to progressives like us. But as we know, even when we win back the Senate, we still probably won't have a filibuster-proof Senate majority.
Yeah.
So, question is, where do you stand on ending the filibuster? And if you do not support ending the filibuster, how do you propose that you will get enough Senate Republicans on board to get these ambitious policy proposals through?
Yeah. This is a really tough question. I began my remarks talking about the bipartisan path that we found to expand mental health care access for veterans. And I believe it's really necessary for this democracy to survive, much less to thrive, to find common cause across the aisle. And the filibuster is intended to force that, right? To make sure that we listen to folks who don't arrive at the same conclusions that we do and find that consensus and compromise. And yet it has been so abused. The power in the Senate, especially under the leadership of Mitch McConnell, who effectively stripped President Barack Obama of his last year in office the ability to nominate, as he's constitutionally guaranteed to do, someone to the Supreme Court, who, when asked what his top priority was not economic revitalization or full employment or health care for all, but defeating Barack Obama at the next election. Given the abuse that institution and that procedure has produced, and given the challenges that we face, I think we have to be open to ending the filibuster. I think we have to be open to other institutional reforms like term limits, not just for members of Congress, in which I believe, but term limits for members of the Supreme Court, so that we have some regular turnover in that institution, given what we're facing right now. So these are extraordinary times, and I believe they demand extraordinary measures, and it's only within that environment that I would even contemplate doing something like this. So thank you for asking the question. Thank you both, and happy Father's Day.
This is our last question.
Hi.
Hi, thanks for coming out today. This is my hometown. Currently live in Northland. But anyways, I've never lived in a time like today where things are so polarized. So how do you propose, or what's your plan for creating spaces where it's not just Republican, Democrat, but young, old, black, brown, white? Where do you, see spaces, or do you even feel that, well, I think you do, but feel that we can have the opportunity to have those spaces in this country during this time?
Love your question. Gets at the heart of the fact that this country is as polarized as it has ever been. And it's being divided further every day by a president who operates on fear. And I don't know that this is something that can be debated, given his very words. Attempting to ban all Muslims from this country, under the premise that they're somehow violent or dangerous to us. And you really have to look pretty far back in the history of Western democracies, maybe 80, 85 years ago, to find another country that said that one people of one religion are somehow inherently defective or wrong or don't belong or should be treated differently. To describe Mexican immigrants as rapists and criminals, to warn about asylum seekers who are leaving the deadliest countries on the face of the planet today. It's the only thing that would cause you to send your baby on a 2,000-mile journey if there were nothing that you could do to protect her life in the community in which you lived, in the country that you called home. But by trying to make us afraid, he keeps us apart. He makes this country angry. And the answer to that cannot be more of the same. We cannot pit ourselves against each other. So my message to you is, if you are a Republican, you are in the right place. If you're a Democrat, I'm glad you're here as well. Independents, you're always welcome. We love seeing that. My mom is a lifelong Republican. And so we very often see things a little bit differently, don't come to the same conclusion. I will, as a side note, tell you she voted for me, though, in the last election, so we can come to some common ground. But, yeah, we got to listen to each other. And when I was talking about Texas, I was talking about not writing people off based on who they voted for last time. We say, no me importa, I do not care. We don't write you off based on your geography. We're going to go everywhere, listen to everyone, bring everybody in. It's the only way that you'll confront these challenges. And this forum, I think, is also the answer to your question. As a city councilman, we held a town hall meeting every single week. As a member of Congress, every single month. All comers welcome, no holds barred. We never asked your party affiliation. And the criticism I received at some of those, the tough questions, they made me such a better representative than I would have otherwise been. And so as president, I'm committing that every single one of my cabinet secretaries will hold a town hall meeting every single month, not for show, but for real, listening to their fellow Americans and being held accountable by those whom they serve in these positions of power and public trust. So as you see us campaign, you will see us bringing people in without regard to our differences, which should never define us or keep us from doing the great work ahead. Thank you for being here, for asking such an important question. Okay, so Cynthia is telling us that we have a little bit of time for anybody who would like to take a picture or quickly say hello. I'm going to be in the back over here. But if I don't get a chance to see you in person or get a chance to shake your hand, let me just thank you for being here today. To all the veterans who are here, to thank you for your service to our country, and everyone else, to thank you in advance for standing up to be counted to make this decision for our country. Gracias. We appreciate it. Thank you very much.